Joined by David Morris, a 4-year letter winner with the Ole Miss football team, a 2002 graduate of the University of Mississippi. He was the first true walk-on to ever start a game in the SEC. That was the 1998 Egg Bowl. Now he's making a name for himself as a quarterback guru with QB Country down in Alabama, and they've expanded all across the region. It's been fun to watch. But David, what's going on, man? How you doing?
Hey, Seth, Brandon, how you guys doing?
Great, man. Excited to be
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, get a chance to chat with you.
Absolutely.
And I think about this a lot because I'm a huge draft guy, David, and this industry has really expanded when you talk about the Clarksons and the Whitfields and Jordan Palmer, John Beck, and of course, David Morris and QB Country. When did you decide this was a viable career for you? I mean, you're about to pick up when everybody else is kind of slowing up in the football world. You're about to start picking up.
Yeah, no, man, it's weird. It's like, games are being played on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and everybody's like, man, you got to be slammed. I'm like, man, actually, this is when we, kind of sit back and watch. And, there's a lot of news, a lot of good news, a lot of bad news on all three of those days. And because we got a lot of guys. But, ever since I was a little kid, I've been in love with football, since I could walk and pick up a ball. So when I got out of school, I was in real estate but I started training kids just a little bit on the side, and dads would call and say, hey, would you mind, throwing the ball around with my son? I'm like, oh my gosh, you kidding me? Like, I get to go throw the ball around again. And so it just started like that, and gradually picked up a couple more kids, a couple more families each year. And that was enough at the time. It just kind of my fix, my football fix. So fast forward, I think I created QB Country in 2010 after 7 years of doing it on the side, just kind of David Morris quarterback training or whatever. And then went full time in 2011. So we just kind of finished our 10th year. And man, I think as you grow in this business, you start to realize, oh, okay, maybe these are the boundaries in which, we can do this well. And when you're young in the business, one of the big things you always say to yourself is, oh man, I want to train guys for the draft. I want to train these guys for draft prep, NFL draft prep. It's kind of like in your mind when you're young in the business, it's like, that's the mountaintop, and really when you get to it, you're kind of like, man, this is really cool. It's awesome. It's a ton of work. I love it. But it is just one aspect of our business, similar to, let's say, training high school kids or middle school kids, or, it's kind of a product in that sense.
And you talked about it a little bit, but I mean, you're leaving Ole Miss. Was this something that you kind of saw growing into this, or was it more just, like you said, more of a hobby? I mean, you're doing real estate, and there's a lot of people, have really good careers and really good, lives doing real estate. You could have just done real estate, right? What was kind of that itch that made you want to say, okay, let's see if this works, and then just dive in full time?
So I remember Coach Cutcliffe told me when I was getting out of Ole Miss, I was thinking about coaching, and I was thinking about, business. I really didn't know. I grew up in a family where my mom was an artist and my dad was a real estate appraiser. And so the thought of getting into sports business didn't really come up often. It was more just like, you graduate from school and you go to work, so I didn't really understand what that meant back then. And I think now there's just so many different things you can do in sports business. But when I got out, no, it didn't happen fast. It was more just like, all right, I'm obsessed with football. I miss it. The further I got away from it, the more that was, rung true. Like I said, Coach Cut comes to me and he says, David, you don't coach football because you love it. You coach football because you can't live without it. And there was no doubt that I couldn't live without football. It was just like, another thing. I remember reading a book. There's a great book I read about personal vocation. It's called Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer. He was a teacher, but he didn't understand where his classroom should be. So, like, in what classroom could he make the biggest impact on students? And so for me, it's like, okay, I know I'm a coach. I know I got to be in football, but what does it look like? And so I dabbled in high school coaching. I kind of thought and kicked around some of the, the college or NFL stuff. And then the more I was training kids, the more I was just eaten up with the thought of bringing kids together from all different parts of the country, even down here on the coast, private schools, public schools, creating friends, creating bridges, community, holding people accountable, and building all this stuff through the game of football just fired me up. And so I think kind of young, even young at this, I had this thought of, there was the circle, the give and take, and the thing that you kind of are drawn to in this game, that like, okay, youth kids look up to that eighth grade quarterback. The eighth grade quarterback looks up to the high school quarterback. The high school quarterback looks up to the college kid, and then the NFL kid. And so there's this circle that's fascinating to me, that is kind of always revolving. And it was cool to be a part of each step of that.
Well, it sounds like you had guys too that you looked up to in a coaching aspect, and you were around Tommy Tuberville, David Cutcliffe, Noel Mazzoni, Kurt Roper, some of the best offensive minds, while you were here at Ole Miss. And we hear about this all the time with kids, and the impact that coaches directly have on them in the relationships, whether it's recruiting or just having a time on campus. What did your coaches mean to you as you now are molding the minds of future QBs?
They just opened my mind to the depths and the heights of the quarterback position, of football in general. I knew I loved the game, from a just pure joy standpoint. There's nothing that brought me more joy growing up than playing football. When you really start learning, football, I think there's a different light bulb that goes off that's just as intriguing. And, maybe not quite as pure, like you love football, but like, do you love learning football? And so I did fall in love with learning football. And I was, like you said, fortunate to be, coached by Noel Mazzoni and David Cutcliffe and Kurt Roper, and these guys that are great teachers and that were passionate about it. And so I feel like I learned something from each of those guys that was foundational in what we built with QB Country.
You start your playing career, you have you're record breaking in Mobile. You don't really get any of those big D1 offers. How do you think that has changed? Right. So now you're helping these kids that are coming up and trying to develop their skills and college recruiting is as crazy as it's ever been. Right. I mean, just with social media and tape and film and all, I mean, what do you feel like, or how much do you feel like that world has changed since maybe you were coming up, whereas a guy like you who's in Mobile that, maybe he's getting overlooked a little bit now because of social media, because of places like QB Country, maybe is starting to get, more recognition, more, phone calls. It's going to be easier to call David Morris and say, hey, what do you think about XYZ, as opposed to trying to go find his film and watch his high school tape or whatever. How do you feel like that has changed over the last really probably 20 years, 30 years?
That's a great question. I remember when I was coming up, this is a funny story. So one of the guys that committed to Ole Miss when I was coming to walk on was my good friend, Doug Ziegler. And so Doug was a quarterback, and I was like, all right, man, I knew a little bit about this guy, Tim Gallahan from midfield, who's the guy I competed against in some camps. So I was like, okay, I think I can hang with that guy. Who's this Doug character? So I remember, maybe Google was around then. It was 1998, and I remember I somehow found his film. I was like, wow, that guy's a really good athlete. I don't know how good he could throw it. And but anyway, so the rest is history. He moves to tight end. He's one of the best tight ends in school history. But I do think social media. I do think Huddle. I do think the way that recruiting is going on now, there's just so much more content out there, easily accessible, no matter who you are, where you are. Same token, there's so much out there that now people can get overlooked because there's just so much. And that still happens. There's a number of people that go overlooked and under recruited every year. And that's just part of it. One of the things that does light our fire and in the recruiting world is the thought of just, knowing how hard it was for several people in our company to get recruited, even though we deserve to be recruited, definitely kind of gives us a real motivation to help open doors that maybe weren't open for us. And so there is part of that, again, kind of that vocation thing that is like, hey, let's learn from from what we experience, good and bad, and then use it to help open doors and educate other people. That's a big part of what we do, is connect dots, connect people. And, what's more powerful than that, to a family that, maybe doesn't have opportunities, and you can help open a door and all of a sudden they do. I mean, that's incredibly powerful. And it means a lot to us. It's a real obligation, responsibility thing that we feel, to go all in on trying to help people, help kids get opportunities that they deserve.
So you bet on yourself, right? We're talking about how you didn't get the D1 offer that you potentially wanted. You walk on at Ole Miss, back up Romero. We mentioned how you started in the Egg Bowl in 1998 when he was injured. You're pretty much on track to figure into the plans at Ole Miss, right? And then coaching change, Eli Manning commits, and I know you and Eli have an absolutely fantastic relationship, but you flash back to that time in your life. What's going on in David Morris's head with all this happening?
There's a lot going on. Romero was really, really good, really talented. I remember coming on campus and seeing that guy slinging around, for the first time. I was like, wow, I get it. Parade All-American, that's what they look like. The guy could just really spin it. Just so talented. And then I learned a lot from Romero. We were roommates that my freshman year. And my goal initially was to earn the second string job, because I was trying to be realistic. Like, I wasn't going to come in and then beat out Romero. So did earn that second string job. And so, it was going good, kind of checked the box, and, got to start that one game. The Egg Bowl was amazing experience. Learned a lot, and then I remember, growing up, I remember watching Peyton Manning and just thinking, wow, I've never seen anybody like this guy. I've never seen anybody, the feet, the presence, the confidence, the just the air of control. He's got it all kind of figured out, and everything, he just kind of did it differently, played the position differently. And I knew that his coach was David Cutcliffe. And so, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, David Cutcliffe is coming to be our coach here. Like, this guy is the guy, he's the quarterback coach, and I get to come learn from him. And so right off the bat, I was like, oh my God, I'm about to be getting coached up by Peyton's, this guy that I watched, and was like, whoa, man, this guy's just incredible. And he was. I remember that first meeting I had with him. I was blown away. Just new material, new train of thought. Like, I was thinking like this, and all of a sudden he's like, no, I want you to think like this. And I was like, whoa, that's a lot, but I was just like, let's go. And this is the best guy in the world to do it. They had signed T. Martin, Tennessee did, several years before that, down in Mobile. He's a guy that I watched down here, one of the best to ever do it down here. And so I just knew how big time, David Cutcliffe was. He comes in. I just didn't think hard enough that he's probably going to bring, Peyton's brother Eli, right behind, my freshman year, and he did. And I always tell people that's when, that's the reason why my stats kind of peak out my freshman year, and they weren't very good the freshman year. So look, Eli Manning, I learned so much from him. I saw excellence every day from a standpoint of preparation and just competitiveness and will and perseverance. And he went through a lot, and I think he, for him to have the career he did there under the circumstances, is just amazing. But just to be around a guy that's so competitive and so driven, it was really neat. We're best friends now, and I do owe a lot of my I guess a lot of my experiences that I lean on now are things that I learned from David Cutcliffe, Kurt Roper, and Eli Manning, and Romero Miller. It's important for us to know what it feels like to be a backup. We coach we coach a ton of backups. It's important for us to know what it means to feel like, to lead the state of Alabama or Mississippi or Georgia in passing and then not get recruited. It's also important to understand how someone who has a ton of character and balance manages being the number one player in the country. right? Or maybe the number one player in the draft. And so, man, just the incredible, rich learning lessons I have in all of that, the good, the bad, the heartache, the incredible, kind of proud moments, all of it. I feel like we can lean on those experiences and create a better, more realistic experience for the kids that we train. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
Oh, that's absolutely, you're getting ahead of us though, getting all these questions answered for us, and we love it. The important follow-up here is, if that was 2021 and not 1999, you may have flirted with the transfer portal. That's something that's so prevalent today. Why stay in Oxford? Why stay with Ole Miss when you knew that Eli Manning was going to be the guy the next 4 years?
Great question. That's the way we grew up. I wouldn't transfer today. I don't think. I wouldn't do it. I believe you stick with what you say you're going to do, and for better or worse, going to college isn't a marriage, but in a way, it's like that was the way my dad raised us. It was like, no, you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. And just because it doesn't work out perfectly for you doesn't mean it's not rich. It just means it's real. And so like I experienced a lot of it, a lot of incredible emotional highs and lows those first, 18 months of my college year and a half. And I'm really grateful for all of it. Now, I mean, I did dream of playing in the NFL and being starting quarterback in the SEC, and that stuff didn't happen. I do believe that there's it's even more important now to be able to again, help other people get there, right? And so that's why we really do believe that vocation is a part of this gig, and vocation is where your greatest joy meets the world's greatest need. And down south, there's a lot of people, kids that just dream of playing football, and we get to be a part of that, and there's nothing more meaningful to me, more important to me, and there's nothing that brings me more contentment and peace than just being able to pour into other guys as they go shoot for the stars.
You talked about it a little bit, just being around Eli and Romero, but I mean, we got to know, this is why we're doing this podcast, is to kind of get these inside info. We got to have some stories, maybe some of your favorite stories from either of those guys.
Oh man, Romero, I just remember Romero was so good to me. Romero's a naturally humble guy. Just there's not a whole lot of cocky stuff there. So much fun, kind of childlike, even like kind of just kind of a kid. I remember he's just real laid back, a lot of fun, his hilarious laugh. Even now, I saw him a couple of weeks ago at Eli's deal, and it's just same old Romero, a lot of fun, always laughing, cutting up a little bit. He made it fun, and then to room with him that first year, I got to really see, what it means to prepare for a SEC game. Those Friday nights were interesting, and just kind of, wow, this is neat. I remember it was such an honor to be able to room with Romero Miller, the starting quarterback at Ole Miss, my freshman year. It's just really cool, really cool. And then Eli, room with Eli those 4 years after my true freshman year. So, again, you're seeing one of the best to ever do it, the way his mind thinks the night before a game, right? And a funny story about Eli is that Alabama game. The Alabama game his sophomore year. I remember I grew up in Mobile. I remember how big that was, and I remember the night before the game. Eli's laid back, right? Easy. I remember, I walk in. I'm a little late to come in after dinner. I got an extra cookie or something. So I come up and I walk in the door, and Eli's like on the bed, just jumping. Just like he has like some stupid music on, and he's just jumping and dancing on the bed. And I'm walking, and he's trying to do this to like make me laugh. But I'm thinking, we got Alabama tomorrow. Like, what are you doing? Shut the door. Like, what are you doing? And like, where's your head at? And that's just Eli. He's like, I learned so much about, football is a boys' game. It's got to be fun, and Eli Manning loves football, and it's just a game to him. But when it's on, there's nobody that locks in and prepares more. But when it's off, there's nobody that has more fun as just the laid back normal guy. I learned a lot about balance from that dude. There's no doubt about it. And there's a million other stories on both of them, but PG is what we're trying to keep it here. So
you're right.
I thought I always thought it was funny when I first started working in athletics. One of the first things that I would do is I'd go back and watch a lot of old, segments, right? Segments on certain guys, because you kind of want to know a little bit more about, the job and who you're covering and all those things. And one of the funny ones that you were a part of is the karaoke nights at Eli's with Ziegler and those guys.
Yeah.
I remember seeing one of those. Is there other memories to you that stand out outside of maybe, those two guys that you just look back on and are really fond of?
Oh man, just countless. Some of my best friends, Ross Barkley and Justin Wade and Matt Kuhn and, you mentioned Doug and Eli and John McGarvey and just incredible friendships and incredible memories, on the field, off the field, victories, spring breaks, defeats, all of it. It's hard to put into, a story or two, the experience that we had. I will say this: we had an incredible group of guys, a lot of those guys I just mentioned, that there's 20 more that I could mention and be like, man, what incredible people, and still talk to them today. I just think our locker room was special from a standpoint of good mix of guys from all over that just genuinely, enjoyed being around each other. Seeing Chris Collins a couple of weeks ago and Bill Flowers and a couple of those guys, there was just so many relationships, and we all just hung out together. And I'm sure it's like this now, but I don't know. We had a pretty special group. I would say, it's hard to beat some of those wins up at Eli and Zig's place, after games. You walk up, you got the balcony, you're overlooking the square, and then it's very convenient to walk down the steps and go to the library,
Right.
And it was just set up for a lot of fun and pretty darn convenient. So that stands out.
You were studying that hard after wins?
It's incredible, man. I was a B student at best.
That's been one of the cool things about this show, just catching up with former players, not just football, is I think the overlying theme is that it's always about the relationships and almost the off the field stuff that people remember and are so fond of. That's been really fun to just hear, from everybody across the board, whether it be guys that played in the, 80s or guys that played in the 2000s. It's all, not that you played in the 80s. I know you played in the 90s and early 2000s, but it's been cool. It's been cool to hear that kind of common theme of, it's about the people, about the relationships that carry on, past football. It's not always about the wins and losses. Now, some of them are, yeah, for sure. But I think that's really the cool thing, and the takeaway for our fans when they watch these or listen to these is that, there's more to people's time, as Rebels than just, playing LSU or Alabama or whoever. It's more about the relationships that are built.
That's what it's all about. That when you give so much to a game, to a practice, to a game week, to a career, and you share that giving and taking, with so many people, it's almost it's one of those relationships, and all these are, Jesse Mitchell a couple of weeks ago, and guys that I hadn't seen in a while, but keep up with, you see them, it's like nothing's ever changed, because you experience so much together. It's like one of those, it's like your brother. You haven't talked to him in 2 months, but you talk to him, it's like didn't miss a beat. That stuff, that's kind of the magic of relationship. That's the magic of going all in with someone. And when you play football, you're all in. And to be able to have that type of relationship that transcends time, it is special. And that is why football and football locker rooms are important in our world today, in our country.
All right, I'll ask you to put your analyst hat on for a second. The Rebs have a guy in Matt Corral who's projected as a pretty high draft pick here in the spring. What do you see in his game? What do you think his ceiling is at the next level?
Man, just super talented. Really grew a lot from last year to this year. You think about Matt, you just think about toughness, grit. You think about arm talent. You think about, the word that kind of comes to mind is fearless. I mean, doesn't make any sense that guy's running through safeties and backers the way he does. He is relentless, man. And, that's what it takes. I mean, I would advise him at the next level to be smarter about some of the hits he's taken. But I mean, like, you got to love the type of warrior that guy is. I mean, he puts on the face paint and you're like, you kind of squint a little bit, like, is that William Wallace? It's like, no, it's not. It's Matt Corral. I mean, it's the same type of heart. That dude's got heart and he's got talent. And I'm really excited for him at the next level. I think he's got a bright future. And I do think that he'll learn a lot from the tough stuff at Ole Miss and the incredible good stuff. I think he's remained really balanced and focused through it all. So that's hard, when it's not going well, can you lock in and focus and be consistent, be balanced? When it's going well, and everything's clicking, can you do that? Those are big question marks for a lot of people, and the hardest thing to be is consistent. So I really like where his head was every week. There wasn't fall off, and at the next level, if he can continue to do that and lean on that pattern, that system that he had in place to be prepared each week, then he's going to do big things in the NFL.
You've got a cool resume of guys that are playing on Sundays now, and Daniel Jones, AJ McCarron, Nick Mullins. In your professional life now, who have been some guys that you maybe worked with that you remember, or guys that, not that you remember, but guys that you have like a special bond with, that you've seen kind of go from maybe an unheard of to now playing on Sundays, and some of those favorite guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think of Gardner Minshew, a Mississippi kid. We started training Gardner in 10th grade, and he started for the Eagles the other night and wins that game. Everything he went through in Jacksonville, he was a walk-on at Troy, and then goes to JUCO, wins the national championship, goes to East Carolina, starts some, gets beat out a little bit, packs up, goes to Washington State. Just, again, relentless in his pursuit of his dream. And that's, I respect that. There's nothing more powerful than, a strong heart that doesn't give up, that just doesn't quit, right? And he's got that. I mean, that's special stuff. I'm sure y'all saw that moment, him and his dad Flint after the game the other night. I mean, you can't fake that stuff. I mean, there's a lot there. The biggest thing he's got is this, and can't take that away from someone. And that's part of why he's where he's at. He just didn't quit, didn't go away. And look, I'm gonna tell you something. That guy's as accurate as anybody in the league. He's as mentally tough as anybody in the league. He's not done. He's got a bright NFL future. I'm real proud of him. Daniel Jones had him since 9th grade and kind of opened up that door for him with Coach Cutt at Duke. And, to be doing what he's doing now in the league, and, really just proud of of him, who he is, his character, his balance. And, now he's the Giants quarterback. This past year we had Mac Jones and Davis Mills for draft prep. Mac is really on a roll right now and playing really good football. His ability to focus and prepare is really freaky. It's why you're seeing him have so much success as a rookie in the league. Davis Mills started eight or so games with the Texans, and so two different guys, but two very intelligent guys that understand what it takes to play quarterback in the National Football League. The stories are kind of endless. Cooper Rush is a career backup for the Cowboys. We did his draft prep. He just kind of waited his turn. And, he got one start this year when Dak was out and just crushed it. I think it was on Monday Night Football or Sunday night, one of them, and, had a perfect game. so proud of him. Nick Mullins, you mentioned him, didn't even get an invite to the combine. No all-star game. Maybe it was East-West, but nobody gave him anything. I mean, you look at his stats of the first 3 years in the league, it's up there with Mahomes. And that doesn't mean that he's Mahomes, but geez Louise, what he's done in this league, what people said he couldn't do, so proud. Last one, sorry guys. Jake Fromm. I mean, another one we've had for maybe 8th grade, and these kids are growing up. It gives me so much pride. Is just like, it's just fun to watch a kid grow up. I feel like I'm their freaking dad or their uncle. Jake Fromm's probably going to start for the Giants this week. Daniel's hurt, right? Daniel has a little neck thing. Jake was on the practice squad last week and in the last couple of years with Buffalo, and now it looks like he may get a start. I want Daniel to be healthy and be back, and he's the quarterback for the New York Giants, no doubt. But just it's neat. I mean, Jake Fromm's probably going to get a start this week, and he's a darn good football player. And not many people, say he has the attributes that it takes to play quarterback in the National Football League, and they'll knock his arm strength and all this. And the kid's a winner, and he's accurate, and he'll play quarterback, consistently and well. So many stories. The one thing they all have in common is just perseverance and confidence, and it's fun to watch.
I gotta ask, when did you start with Cooper Rush? Did you ruin homecoming my senior year? Because he was up at Central Michigan, and they came down to Athens and beat my Bobcats my senior year. Was it high school or was it post-college?
Actually, you talking about senior year in high school for you? Or
no, I was in college. When Cooper was beating my team.
Yeah, I started training Cooper like his junior year in college, and so he had a good
so it is your
year.
fault.
And, no, it's not my fault, but it's his fault for sure.
Well, David, before we let you go, just you're getting back to training these future stars. You mentioned so many that are littered throughout the league. Besides the training of quarterbacks, what are you doing for fun? Give us an update on the life of David Morris otherwise.
Man, I get to train, middle school kids, high school kids, youth kids. I love training the young groups, the young kids, because it brings me back to that true love of the field. It also reminds me, I was a kid that just wanted to do this, incredibly. I had this incredible dream when I was a kid too. To be able to look in those kids' eyes and train them is really important to us. It's also good for my eye because they don't move as fast, and I really get to catch things. But no, other than that, my wife Blakely and our 2 daughters, Meryl and Amelia, are 6 and 3. And we're just getting ready for Christmas, man. We got a birthday tomorrow. Amelia turns 7. And so just fun stuff. I'm chasing 2 girls around and chasing a bunch of quarterbacks.
All girls?
2 girls right now. Yeah.
Right now,
I got about 1,000.
I got about say right now.
You heard right now. Yeah. He sounds like me. I got 2 girls, and that's why I tell him right now. I'm like right now. I have about to be a 5-year-old and a 5-month-old. So.
All right. Well, that's some real stuff right there.
That's a rough age, that 5-month-old.
One of y'all 2 need to get us the future quarterback I think both of y'all are looking for. So that's going to be exciting to keep up with along the way. David, you've been so generous with your time. We really appreciate it today, man. And best of luck as you gear up for the most busy time of your year.
Hey, thanks, guys. Always an honor to be on with you guys and keep up the good work.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it, David. Howdy, toddy.
All right, boys. We'll see you. Yes, sir.